The Stanford Prison Experiment. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo turned a Stanford University basement into a fake prison and randomly assigned students to be guards or prisoners. What was supposed to last 2 weeks ended in just 6 days. The guards became sadistic, forcing prisoners to strip naked, put bags over their heads, and simulate sexual acts. Prisoners suffered emotional breakdowns, crying uncontrollably and showing signs of severe trauma. The real danger was how quickly normal people turned into monsters. Zimbardo himself admitted he got caught up in his role as prison superintendent, allowing the abuse to continue. This experiment proved that situational forces can override personal morality. But here's the worst part. Decades later, Zimbardo testified as an expert witness for a real prison guard accused of torture, arguing that the system created the abuse, not the individual. The experiment was never truly replicated because ethics boards deemed it too dangerous. Yet its findings continue to haunt psychology, showing that beneath our civilized surface, a switch can flip under the right conditions. The Milgram Obedience Experiment. In 1961, Yale psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to understand how ordinary Germans participated in the Holocaust. He recruited 40 men and told them they were helping a learning study. Each participant was ordered to deliver electric shocks to a man in another room every time he answered a question wrong. The shocks started at 15 volts and went up to 450 volts, clearly labeled danger, severe shock. The actor in the other room screamed, begged to stop, pounded on the wall, and eventually went silent. Here's the terrifying result. 65% of participants administered the full 450 volts, even when they believed they were killing someone. Milgram ran 18 variations of the experiment. When the teacher could see the victim, obedience dropped to 40%. But when an authority figure stood beside them, obedience stayed high. The real danger is how easily we surrender our conscience. Milgram's subjects showed extreme signs of distress, sweating, trembling, laughing nervously, yet they kept pressing the button. This experiment was never fully replicable today for ethical reasons, but its implications are clear. Most people will follow orders to harm others, especially when someone else takes responsibility. The Little Albert Experiment. In 1920, behaviorist John Watson wanted to prove that fear could be conditioned into a human. He chose a 9-month-old infant named Albert, who showed no fear of a white rat, a rabbit, or a Santa Claus mask. Watson then introduced a loud, terrifying noise by striking a steel bar with a hammer every time Albert touched the rat. After only 7 pairings, Albert burst into tears at the mere sight of the rat. But here's where it gets worse. The fear generalized. Albert became terrified of anything white and fluffy. A rabbit, a dog, a fur coat, even Watson's own beard. This experiment proved that phobias could be artificially created. What happened to little Albert after? Watson never deconditioned him. The child left the hospital with a manufactured fear that likely lasted for years. Researchers spent decades trying to identify Albert's true identity. They eventually found a boy named Douglas Merritt, who died at age 6 of hydrocephalus. Watson's experiment remains a dark milestone in psychology because it sacrificed a human being's well-being for a simple theory about conditioning. No ethics board would allow anything close to this today. The Monster Study. In 1939, speech pathologist Wendell Johnson conducted an experiment on orphan children in Iowa. He wanted to test his theory that labeling children as stutterers would make their speech worse. He selected 22 orphans, none of whom had any speech issues. Half were placed in a positive group, praised for their fluency. The other half were placed in a negative group, constantly criticized and told they were severe stutterers. Here's the horror. The criticized children immediately began developing speech problems. They became withdrawn, anxious, and terrified of speaking. Some who never stuttered before started repeating syllables and freezing up completely. Johnson's experiment worked exactly as he predicted, proving that negative labeling can induce real disorders. But he never attempted to reverse the damage. The children were left permanently scarred. One participant, Mary Tudor, worked on the study and later admitted she felt like a monster for what she did to those kids. That's why the study earned its infamous nickname. The data remained hidden for decades until a San Jose State University student uncovered it in 2001. The surviving participants sued the state of Iowa and received a settlement, but no amount of money could undo the psychological damage inflicted on vulnerable children. The learned helplessness experiment. The moment you believe nothing you do matters, everything changes. Dogs were placed in situations where some could escape pain, while others had no control at all. Later, both groups were given an easy way out. The first group escaped immediately. The second group didn't even try. They just lay there, accepting the pain. But here's the problem. The escape was right in front of them. This is where it gets worse. They had learned that effort was pointless, so they stopped trying completely. The real danger is that humans do this too. Repeated failure, trauma, or rejection can train the brain to give up, even when opportunities exist. It's not just about pain, it's about believing you deserve it. The Robbers Cave experiment. Conflict doesn't need history, it can be created in days. 2 groups of boys were placed in a camp and kept separate. Then competition was introduced. Almost instantly, they turned against each other. Insults, theft, fights, all from kids who were strangers days earlier. But here's the problem. Simply bringing them together didn't fix anything. It made things worse. This is where it gets interesting. Only when they were forced to cooperate on shared problems did the hostility begin to fade. The real danger is how easily division can be manufactured. You don't need deep reasons for hate. Just competition and identity are enough. The blue eyes, brown eyes experiment. Power can change behavior almost instantly. Children were divided based on eye color and told one group was superior. Within hours, the superior kids became arrogant and cruel. They bullied, excluded, and dominated the others. Then the roles were reversed. The victims became the aggressors just as quickly. But here's the disturbing truth. Nothing about the children changed except what they were told. This is where it gets worse. Their academic performance even shifted based on perceived superiority. The real danger is how fragile fairness really is. Give someone power, and behavior changes immediately, even in children. The third wave experiment. A simple classroom turned into something far more dangerous in just days. A teacher introduced strict rules, discipline, and a sense of belonging. Students followed without question. Then they enforced those rules on each other. They reported classmates, excluded outsiders, and became fiercely loyal to the group. But here's the problem. None of it was real. It was all an experiment. This is where it gets worse. Hundreds of students joined, fully believing in a movement that didn't exist. The real danger is how easily people can be pulled into authoritarian systems. All it takes is identity, structure, and a leader. The Aversion Project. During apartheid in South Africa, military psychiatrist Dr. Aubrey Levin ran a secret program to convert gay soldiers. Between 1971 and 1989, over 900 white male conscripts were forced into the project. They were strapped to chairs and shown homoerotic images while being injected with drugs that induced severe nausea and vomiting. Some were given electroconvulsive shocks to their genitals. Others were chemically castrated without consent. The goal was to create an aversion to same-sex attraction. Survivors reported lifelong trauma, erectile dysfunction, chronic depression, and suicide attempts. One man described vomiting every time he felt attracted to another man, even decades later. The project was only exposed after apartheid ended. Levin fled to Canada and continued practicing medicine until 2013, when he was charged with sexual assault on patients. This is not a textbook experiment. It was state-sponsored torture disguised as science. Unlike Milgram or Zimbardo, there was no debriefing, no ethical review, no consent. The Aversion Project proves that psychology can be weaponized when governments decide who counts as human. It remains one of the least known but most disturbing experiments ever conducted because the victims were considered criminals for their identity. The Good Samaritan Experiment. You think you would help someone in need, but the truth is uncomfortable. Students were asked to give a talk about helping others. On the way, they passed a person clearly in distress. Some were told they were late. Others had time. The result was shocking. Most of those in a hurry walked right past, some even stepping over the person. But here's the problem. They were literally about to speak on compassion. This is where it gets worse. The only difference was time pressure. The real danger is that morality isn't fixed. It changes based on situation. Being a good person isn't about intention. It's about whether you stop when it matters.